Hello and welcome everyone to Beyond Compliance. My name is Jim Albright and I'm glad to be back to dig into some more of the challenges, trends, and of course solutions that are impacting process manufacturing today. All right, so I know we're all here to discuss achievable steps to a truly affordable and scalable digital transformation program, but I have to give those that are new to the program a quick peek to what Beyond Compliance is all about. So Beyond Compliance is a regular series that was designed especially for process manufacturers to learn new approaches on how to increase visibility and boost efficiencies across your plant. Now, we gather speakers from all over the industry who are all experts who provide actionable and proven best practices that you can start using today to shed some more light on current gaps and drive existing resources to exceed your line, plant, and of course, your business goals. Beyond Compliance is brought to you by Safety Chain. Safety Chain is an end-to-end plant management platform that's trusted by thousands of process manufacturers across the globe to unite their plant production quality and compliance goals and improve yield, maximize productivity, and of course, ensure compliance. All right, so a few quick housekeeping items. We have all attending mics are muted. But please do submit any of your questions at any time during the presentation because we are leaving room at the end for some Q&A. And yes, we are recording this session and everybody will be getting a link to the replay and the presentation slides later on today. Okay, let's meet today's speaker, Cameron Bergen, who is the co-founder and CEO of Mode 40, one of Safety Chain's good trusted partners. We've been working with you guys for a long time. Some of you may remember Cam on a previous Beyond Compliance webinar where he discussed the hidden benefits of a data-first approach to plant optimization instead of what the latest digital transformation trends were saying. So Cam, welcome back to the show. Glad to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate being called back, and I'm really excited about the topic today because it's something that I think we all, or I personally, in my past, sitting in your shoes, have struggled with is the idea of what I need to do and how overwhelming that can really be. And so I think hopefully after the presentation today, we can look at some small bites and some real things that can drive real value for your business. And so we're going to talk a lot about different approaches to the traditional methods and the digital methods that exist today, some of the best industry practices, and hopefully you walk away with that one nugget, one idea, or one inspiration. A little bit about my background. So I spent about 20 years or almost 30 years or so in building technology-enabled systems in manufacturing. These consist of digital and physical systems. Was happy to have been able to lead the design of one of the most technology-advanced pork processing facilities. So I understand food. I understand food production, I understand manufacturing, and I understand the uniquenesses of what food production and the challenges of it are, which for those who are in the business, understand that it is a unique beast unto itself. We're very proud to have been able to say we've been able to generate more than $500 million in value creation for our client base over that period of time, hoping to do some more with you fine folks here and keep that number growing. And at the end of the day, I'm a farm boy at heart, family man, and get me out in the nature, you're probably gonna see a smile on my face. So now you know everything there is to know about me, so let's get to the topic. I want to start off looking at not what we think is the benefits exist out there, but what has been proven time and time again. In particular, we're going to reference this Deloitte study that was done. This study has really highlighted the importance of traditional improvement programs, improvement approaches, which are all great. They're all successful in their own right. But we're really going to look at the exponential value in taking the same concepts and digitizing them. And what we're going to do today is look at the practical examples in each one of our areas, our waste areas, comparing the traditional approaches to the digital approaches. A big part of this is a big part of this approach. I jumped one slide. Give me 1 second to go back. Thank you. A big part of why we took this approach is simply because while I spent the first 20 years working for food production company, we really struggled at being able to find an organization that we could partner with that would help ensure that the things I needed my business to become, such as improvement on my process floor, labor reduction costs, capital reduction costs, all the pain points of what you experience in your business today, we needed to ensure that these things we achieved. And the reason we need to ensure them is because I was part of that 70% of projects failing. And we learned over the course of 20 years or so how to hone in a process to become part of the 30% successful. And a big part of what we're going to talk about today is that approach and that experience. When we look at what's necessary and what's involved, we have an illustration here that I think is really important for us to just dwell on for a second. And this illustration is highlighting the importance of data. So let's take one quick example, such as throughput for my facility. So throughput is a great example. We're collecting that throughput information at the field level. This is maybe through your equipment or some sensors you have or an operator input, all kinds. But that piece of information is incredibly valuable for us. And we need it for things like operations management, compliance, financial management, and a whole series of other reporting needs. So in every layer of this space, it needs the data in order for us to drive the right decisions at the right time. And in order to do that, we can't afford to hire people to walk that information around our organization. We can't afford for them to interpret and optimize that information across our organization. So when it comes to what we do for our clients, we ensure that we're capturing the right information and we're disseminating that at whatever layer is responsible and required. And that could be at any one of these layers that you see here. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of the topic today. And I really want to start off with keeping in mind that everything you approach in terms of your continuous improvements, your digital transformations, any Industry 4.0 initiative you have, we want to put value first. And putting value first isn't just, well, arbitrary in the fact that we want to be able to say, well, this is going to improve something. We've got to take it one step further. And that step further is to really quantify what you expect to happen at the outcome. And then when you're done your initiative, validate that you actually achieved it. And that's a really important step and one we feel that is missing from most project implementations. So I really want to keep this theme of putting your value first through these examples. So illustrating the earlier mentioned Deloitte study is a great illustration here in terms of what the traditional approaches that we most commonly see and the methods to which the digital approaches where they drive value. So you see it in being able to automatically detect different quality attributes. And many of us have things like X-rays and quality detection systems and cameras, or maybe you don't yet, and you're thinking about it. Maybe you have manual people today doing evaluations, but you've made improvements in a way to do that at an optimal stage. But to take it to the next level, better information, quicker, faster, cheaper, is an example of what you see here for quality sensing and detection. So one question we get often is, wait, does this mean that I have to have some established continuous improvement program and special resources and industrial engineering people and teams, and I have to have had all of these implementations and traditional improvements already? The answer is no. You don't have to start with all the traditional approaches. We see most organizations adopting the digital versions first today because it's a faster way to an increased ROI. And at the end of the day, we're putting value first. But that also doesn't mean that you don't have to start there. You could be in a stage in your business where you're saying, look, I need to make some small incremental improvements because I need to save today. And by saving today, I'll be able to pay for it tomorrow. Taking it one step further, we look at what areas in our business are the quantifiable areas of improvement that I can expect by adopting these digital approaches. And here you can see asset efficiency and quality and reduced costs to a significant degree. And this is, of course, a journey in terms of achieving these results. But when we think about putting value first and how we quantify them, we want to be thinking about these categories and these kinds of improvements when you're making your decisions for ROI, because they are substantial. So that's a quick overview, very high level. I want to now dive into some of the specific examples. Kanban. The term you may have heard before, very common in many of the traditional manufacturing. But it's a signal mechanism used to control work. And that signal mechanism, in this case on the left-hand side, you see a what's referred to as a two-bin system. And quite simply, when one bin is empty, you know you need to reorder to fill the bin. Very, very simple organization, very simple version of an organization. And on the right-hand side, you see a more digital version of that. Now, on the surface, it's very much more, it appears to be much more simple in terms of, well, I have the ability to collect information for when the bin is empty. And this is usually done using auto IDs, such as scanning or an RFID version. There's many forms. But what you don't see typically is the traditional version usually ends with the ability to not run out. So that's great. Keep the shop floor running, don't have downtime. That's fantastic. But the overhead to process it is still significant. It still requires a person to make a lot of manual steps along the way in order to ensure that the inventory is fulfilled. In the digital version, we see most commonly your orders are being auto-generated, or in even more advanced cases, we see what's referred to as VMI, which is vendor managed inventory, where the vendor themselves is actually ensuring that they're stock fulfilling your parts as needed. And we see those types of adoptions improve the total process time by over 90%. So we think about all the effort. And we were recently, for example, at a facility who had a very traditional, very successful traditional Kanban system. And the presumption was, well, you know, there's probably not a lot of extra value because I've already solved downtime. And yes, that is the biggest expense in this journey to solve. But we said, you know what, just for fun, let's walk the process of reordering something. Now, I'm sure this only existed in one place and probably not anywhere in your organizations, but if you would walk the process of something completely and fully, in this case, we had a journey of a tag that needed to be reordered that consumed more than 6 hours for every single order for every single time because of the amount of people that the card had to touch through, the amount of processing time that it had to take, the amount of verification. And when we looked at how many of times does this bin have to get fulfilled, and if we make some quick calculations and quick assumptions, we can say, look, in 15 minutes, we've determined that you have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of overhead in managing a bin that is roughly the size of what you see in this picture here today. And when we talk about putting value first, you say, well, wait a second. The ROI on a digital version of this starts to become measured in months, not years. And it's an example of what we talk about of being able to institute some digital format that is significantly more value than we truly think it is. So that is Kanban. This one I'm probably the most excited to highlight. This may be a more unfamiliar term called Heijunka. Again, very lean manufacturing based. This is a scheduling methodology for multi-product environments where production is leveled by strategically alternating the product mix to be manufactured in a given period. So on the left-hand side, we see a simple illustration of a traditional version where I'm not bulk producing something and I'm not bulk producing version A, I'm not bulk producing version B, model C and D, etc. But I'm actually producing things in a sequence which allows us to level load our constraints. Now, that's not always possible for your manufacturing process, depending on what you're manufacturing. More possible in uh, clothing, in this case, as an example. But we need to think about this not just from a, well, I can't really change my production because that's the way I'm set up. But what I really want you to think about here is the way you're planning your manufacturing. And the digital version of that, the concept is look, I can take in more information, I can take in more data points, I can take in more observations, and I can use all of that in a way to drive my planning process to a better degree than I'm doing today. And we've seen versions of this in simplistic forms on Excel spreadsheets, which we see in almost every manufacturing. We've seen versions of this in custom built systems. I've seen a version of this on a whiteboard. All successful in their own right in terms of driving the way the planning process works to an optimal state. And the reality is, especially in food production and in particular, and many manufacturing, is there are more things going on than a person can observe. There are more things going on than we're measuring out of our basic ERP system, even if I have one, or my basic planning system. There are more things going on that are stopping us from better fulfilling orders, from better driving performance, from better optimizing. And so it's not just the idea of changing the scheduling methodology, but we really want you to think about how are we planning? What events occur that don't allow us to optimize for our shift? Here's one example for you that we see all the time, and I ask this quite frequently. In fact, I'd love some feedback from everyone here. Is if you have a multi-shift plant, is shift 2 outperforming shift 1? And the answer probably is no. Well, why? Well, that's the way it's always been. Really? We performed an experiment on that concept with a facility about 3 years ago, where we pulled the shift 2 supervisors aside and we said, look, what's anecdotally, but your feelings, what is stopping you from outperforming shift 1? What do we think? We boiled it down into a lot of the challenges. I mean, we had a lot of the same things I'm sure you deal with. Well, the shift 1 guys left a bunch of work for us and we have to catch up. Okay, that's interesting. Well, you know, most people on the workforce, we're not trained as much, so we don't have, because we got the new people coming in and they have to work shift 2 first. Okay, yeah, that's fair. What else? And so we compiled a list, and what we worked with is the planning process to say, look, given these new constraints, which are not known in the planning process, given these new constraints, how do we further optimize for our shift 2? And we set a goal and said, in 30 days, we're going to have the first successful shift 2 beat shift 1. Didn't tell any of the shift 1 guys. It's a very black ops project, if you will. And after the course of 30 days of implementing a number of different constraints and planning methods, we were able to successfully get shift 2 to outperform shift 1. And it's a simple example about taking those other variables, and instead of assuming that's the way it's always been, we start working with them, but they become complex. So we rely on digital systems that allow us to organize these heuristics and organize our ability to optimize with all that information that's beyond what we typically do, which is, well, I have this demand and I organize it around my capacity for my line, and I organize it around the order to which I want to fulfill the orders, and there we go. I'll just issue that information to the shop floor and they'll figure it out from there. By bridging both those worlds, we're able to drive optimization to a new level. In my opinion, this is the single most underutilized concept in manufacturing. All right, 3P, production, preparation, process. It's a collaborative process in which cross-functional teams use physical representations of environments to create new products or processes. So on the left-hand side, you see a very traditional approach. Lots of cardboard, lots of Post-its, lots of paper. We've seen lots of methods. Seen a team use shopping carts to illustrate pallet jacks before, and all kinds of different creative ways of trying to get a physical idea of what we want to do and improve. And this is a great way to find some hidden effects of the change you want to make. Well, I'm just going to change the station and we're just going to move these things. And that doesn't really have to do with anything else. Well, that could be true. But often we find the improvements that we want to make have consequences. And those consequences are often unforeseen. So by taking a traditional approach, we can start to learn some of those things. But the traditional approach has extremely limited ability to be very functional. So the digital version of this today, we would consider calling it a digital twinning. So creating a representation of your manufacturing space, your manufacturing line, that's in a digital format. And by having that format, we're, again, like the planning process, we're able to take in a significant amount of other variables and look at the entire production process and what some of those effects might be. Now, do you need a digital version to be successful? Absolutely not. We can save today to pay for tomorrow. You can start with shopping carts and cardboard and mock up a change to this workstation you want, and what for very low cost and very low investment. But as you start to think about, and as your manufacturing process maybe starts to become more complex, or you already have a complex process, the consequences to those changes become more extreme. But not only the consequences of those changes, the assumptions you have about your investments is probably the lowest hanging fruit in terms of being able to drive value. And this comes in the form of, well, I'm going to buy this new robotic thing, or this new auto filler, or this new machine X, and it's going to automate that process. So we'll get better. And the answer probably is yes. But if the expectation is that there'll be no consequences that we haven't taken a look at, that may impact our process. So an example would be one that we've seen. So we bought the new auto filler and we've increased the number of bags it's filling because the upstream equipment had greater capacity. Fantastic. Everything's great. That's interesting because the quality rejects are going up. Well, how can that be? That doesn't make any sense. We bought the equipment, it's auto filling, everything's fantastic, should be fantastic, right? But the consequence was further downstream, we didn't take into account the manual labor required to keep up with the process in an appropriate way. And it turns out that they're falling behind periodically. And turns out that when they're falling behind periodically, then it is a negative consequence of the quality program, and those inventories are being held and or even rejected in many cases. Well, wait a second, now what do we do? Well, we can't just hire more people. We don't have the budget for it. We don't have that. We don't have what we wanted for it. So digital twinning allows us the ability to look at the full scale consequences to improvements and changes and things that we want to make. So there are three areas of traditional versions versus digital versions. Now what we're going to do is dive a little bit deeper into some of the 7 common wastes and what we see as digital versus traditional versions. So again, you may be familiar with the 7 wastes. The 2DIME acronym is my favorite one and organized in this way. So first off, we have transport. So again, in transport, we have very traditional approaches, which is to reduction in nonlinear segment processes across the shop floor. And in the digital version, we have optimizing that transport. So putting the right people, the right equipment at the right place at the right time, which might seem like a very simple process. But the number of times that we would walk through, and I'll share a quick project story around this. We had a company about 2 years back looking to do a labor labor reduction initiative, labor throughout their whole plant. And one of the areas they were not able to implement improvements was within the material handling. And they said, well, we just can't figure this out. We've looked at this from every which way. We know we can go to automated guided vehicles, AGVs, or some other robotic movement, but we don't have the capital for that right now. That's not in the budget. We don't know what to do. Is there anything we can do? Well, we take a digital approach to the problem, and the project looked like this. We put a few beacons on their material handling equipment, and we tracked the movement that they had. Once we tracked the movement that they had, it gave us a picture of what the day in the life of, so to speak. By analyzing that data, we were able to find that the approach, which was a traditional approach, which is, hey, you should always make these movements. This we refer to it as a milk run. Go to station A, then go to station B, then go to station C, and continue to that order of events. And that's the way, that'll be an optimal run. And by definition of total transport time, it was an optimal run. But the problem was not all things were produced in a very linear fashion, meaning sometimes you needed to go to station B before station A. Sometimes you need to go to station C before station A, and so on. And they had around 20 different stations. So you can imagine that the priorities changed to a production day, and it was very much based on the production planning process. Oh yeah, that's right. On Wednesday afternoons, we usually do change what we're making. And at those days, yeah, we just typically throw more people at the problem. Well, once we had the movement analysis, we were able to identify and link to the production process and predict what needed to be done when. Using that approach, we were able to provide people a simple handheld device that was mounted to their material handling equipment. And that gave them the instruction, said, look, you're picking up at station A. Once you're done, you're going to go to station G and go there next. A very low cost solution that was able to reduce the total manpower in this area by approximately 10%. And so it's a very example of a traditional approach versus a digital approach. So our second waste, which is waiting. So our traditional approaches have us periodically refine our standard work. So let's look at what people are doing. Let's figure out a way they can make less. Figure out the way that they can be more efficient in their movements, more efficient with what they're doing, and they're not standing around waiting for someone before them or someone to deliver something to them. How do we manually go and approach these things? The digital version will aggregate, again, very similar to what I talked about with the digital twinning. It's going to aggregate all of the things that are around that person that affect the ability for them to do it. So one example here that we found unique, again, particular food processing, was we had an individual who after about, or station I should say, sorry, that after about halfway through the shift, we found that they became very inefficient. Well, these are highly trained people, and nothing was really changing before and after. So standard work would allow us to observe their process and say, okay, how do we make some changes here? But when we looked at the digital version, we said, let's look at all of the things they're doing as well as the environment around them. We looked at the environment around them, and then, sorry, the third thing we engaged is the people. When we collect all that data and that information, we essentially found out that the way the HVAC system was designed for the floor was pumping air into this area where the manufacturing was going, and it was creating a scenario where they were getting too cold. Now, easy problem to solve, but unless you're engaged workforce, it's not necessarily always visible. And the people didn't even really realize that this was happening because it happened over the course of hours. So what ended up happening in that case, you see a lot of inefficiencies with the production process, which is what ended up causing a lot of waiting on the downstream process. So again, another example of looking at the data and information around the whole process as opposed to what we can just simply easily observe. Overproduction. So overproduction is pretty straightforward in terms of I made more things than I should have. The digital version of this is looking at real-time value stream analysis. Again, in many cases, does not very complex. This goes back to what I talked about earlier with Hijunka and really looking at that planning process, but not just a planning process that says, oh, I put out a good production plan, I'll start working on the next one, but actually has a feedback loop from the manufacturing side that says, look, something's not going the way we want according to plan. What do we need to do about it? And that real-time value stream analysis allows us to quicker address and or identify problems that we can prevent in the future from creating overproduction. A few left here. So defects. Traditional defects establishes a way, standards in a way assets are maintained, processes are defined, products are designed. We do this every day for many reasons in compliancy. We have to do these things according to law. The digital version of this is, again, looking at systems. And earlier we talked about quality evaluation using cameras or using sensors or using x-rays or these kinds of automated equipment. But the question we want to think about, as I've told you before, is what do you do with that data? Is that x-ray system auto-populating your safety chain compliance form and creating a workflow around it? Because if not, you've got a lot of overhead, you've got a lot of waiting, people are waiting for that information, you've got a lot of time that you could be investing into improvements, and that time is wasted money, and improvements is saved money. So that's an example of what we highlighted earlier relative to defects. See, I'm running up on time, so I'll pick it up a little bit here. Inventory. So real-time production planning process, again, going back to the Hijunka, is really honing in those variables that are affecting your inventory growth, optimizing for how much inventory do I need? Am I wasting working capital that I don't need to be? Am I pre-producing things early because I think I'm being more efficient with them? These are all kinds of questions to ask to extract the value that's sitting in inventory, which is tied up capital. Digital version of Motion is going to allow for 24/7 analysis. So an example of this, there are a number of excellent, what we would call industrial engineering cameras that exist that have the ability to 24/7 monitor tasks and work level tasks. Now, traditional approaches say, I need to hire industrial engineering disciplines or equivalent. I need to do time studies. I need to analyze those time studies. I need to take all those steps. That might be a 2-week process, maybe 30-day process to come up with the improvements and then implement an improvement. Digital versions today are cameras that are doing real-time analysis and in real time flagging what is being constrained at the employee level. That's the version of doing automated motion capture and improving things in real time. So I've quickly given you many examples of what the digital forms versus the traditional forms, but I get this question almost exclusively every time is, but where do I start? All of this sounds great. I want it all. I need it all. I know my business needs to improve, but how do I start? Quite frankly, the answer is you start simple. You want to take a save today to pay for tomorrow approach, but to do that, it takes a couple of key decisions that you or your leadership group need to make. And the first step is to find one problem that exists that can reasonably tackled in about 30 days. That could be quicker, could be longer if necessary, depending on what it is, but you don't want to take more than 30 days. You want to approximate reasonably. Don't spend a week trying to analyze the nth degree. Directionally, try to identify is, look, this is a $10,000 a year problem. This is a $50,000 a year problem. It's whatever it is. But you want to do that in the course of half a day or less. So we approximate the value. We do it. We find something that we can reasonably control and we implement for a low cost and we save. We're done. But the commitment you need to make as an organization is, now that we've done this, now we need to reinvest. And that's our recommendation around how you save today to pay for tomorrow. We put a simple graph together to illustrate the value generation per quarter, cumulative value generation per quarter, by taking this very simple, solve a problem in 30 days and extract the incremental scalable value from that problem over the course of years. And those $10,000 initiatives, and in many cases, it's actually quite more significantly than that, but they accumulate to become $20,000 a month and become $30,000 a month, become $50,000 a month, and they continue to accumulate to significant value. Once you've achieved a significant value, now we can start talking about what is a version of implementing this that affects my whole line, that is capital intensive, that is maybe robotics, that is maybe this dream end state. We have seen some of the best examples of this executed with a coat hanger and duct tape. That can't be right. A coat hanger and duct tape? Absolutely. We observed a manufacturing process. Probably the best example, I think, of starting somewhere and saving today to pay for tomorrow was the transfer conveyance really needed a more appropriate guide to shift the product a little bit, because every once in a while they would have a problem with the product, creating a bottleneck and kind of stopping the line. But to buy the automated conveyance equipment was going to be, they got a quote, it's going to be roughly $250,000 to be appropriate. But that was going to be too much money. And so the answer was, look, is there anything we can do in 15 minutes that won't solve the problem, but will help the problem? And very clever maintenance individual said, I think we could try something. So using a coat hanger and duct tape, this is a true story, they were able to essentially put a small guide in place that they had to fix every week or so. Eventually they had to fix it every week or so. We said, look, you're now solving about 50% of your problem. And that 50% of your problem is going to be worth around, in their case, around $50,000 a month. So great. Make the commitment to yourself to sustain the coat hanger, save your $50,000 a month for 4 months, and you have this free capital that now exists that you were wasting before, that you can now go buy the automated conveyance equipment. And it's a great example of how to start. It doesn't have to start with the complexity. It doesn't have to start with purely starting in a digital space, but it also can. You could say, look, I've done a lot of these things right now. One other common one we see is we enter data into 6 different places, and it takes forever because I got to wait for so-and-so to do their thing before I can do my thing. So not just from the manufacturing floor, but from the front office perspective. The same wastes exist. I'm still waiting. I'm still non-optimized. So in that case, you might have, look, we need to do a digital integration project to optimize that data flow. Stop wasting everyone's time. Simple project. A couple of weeks, get the project in, data map done, and now all of a sudden we have 6, 7, 8, 10, whatever people who are not relying on having to wait around to do their functions. So a couple of different examples. Lastly, I want to myth bust a few of the most common questions that we see. Do we have to have a matured program before we start? Absolutely not. This is for everyone. And in fact, we see more successful implementations of everything we just talked about in small to medium scale, where it's very controllable and less complexity for decision making. But this is only for really large companies, right? Absolutely not. Making these changes today are for every organization of every size, of every kind. Now, you might not be prepared to have large capital budgets to completely implement everything we've just talked about, but there are forms that you can implement it along that journey that are simple today, and they may become complex tomorrow. Is it too complex to change everything we do? No. You need to plan for it. you need to make sure that we do it. But the answer is it is far more simple to take small bites of making improvements to save today to pay for tomorrow than you probably think it does. It costs a lot of money to get value. I think I've extracted a coat hanger and duct tape for $50,000 a month. It doesn't cost a lot of money to get value. And there are probably forms of that that you already can think about or come up with. This requires a team of specialists. No, it does not require a team of specialists. This is making tactical changes typically involves engaging people on your front line or doing the thing that you know you've observed and seen for the last years that you just need to get done. And it's taking that first step to make that first change. Our organizations changes too frequently for this. In that mindset, you're probably the ideal candidate to start here because there's no organization that changes too frequently to drive value in their business. There's no organization that's too complex. There's no process that's too complex that saving money isn't important. And if there is, please reach out to me after this because I'd love to talk to you. And I think that about wraps it up.
It sure does. And just, I guess the moral of the story is always have a coat hanger and some duct tape laying around, right?
That's right.
Amazing, amazing. Thanks, Cam. Definitely a lot of good stuff here that, quite frankly, when you put it side by side, traditional approaches versus digital, it really, at least for me, it did kind of bring up a lot of aha moments. So just looking over some of the questions here, I'm seeing a theme, and you definitely kind of answered it towards the end, but just to provide a little more context around, um, you know, when we talk about digital twins, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
To create a digital twin, you obviously need some software, and you need some ways to extract data at various points within the line, and you need to be able to like suck everything up into some type of visualization that allows you to see all of those activities within the environment. I think you
Yep.
talked about the HVAC example, right?
Yep.
That sounds very expensive and complicated for some
Yep.
folks, right? So going back to that coat hanger and duct tape example, I mean, how can um, manufacturers that aren't necessarily ready for that level, the digital twin level,
Yep.
how do they get started around those processes?
Yeah. I mean, the most common versions of the first step of something like that is you start your, as much as it pains me to say, you want to start with your Excel sheet and you want to build out that model. You may be making some automated data inputs in there, and you may be a combination of manual data inputs. That's fine. That's a first step. There's nothing wrong with building out a simple model in Excel that starts to help you calculate. Okay, so it's not the perfect version of the illustration I shared earlier. That's okay. That is the coat hanger and duct tape. Our goal is not to change everything with that approach. Our goal is to make a tangible, reasonable first step. So to do that, you don't need to capture everything. You need to capture many things that are important, but you don't need everything because we're not trying to execute perfection. We're trying to increment beyond what today is. And so that's a very very simple, very flexible tool, very tactical version of, and very affordable. Now it takes some time, so you might be investing some of your time in that 30 days to build that model. But the answer is you can quite simply use tools like that. There are also some other tools that we can highlight for everyone that exist that are maybe a little more advanced, but they do take some engineering discipline. So depending on what your skill sets are, you want the right tool for the right person for the right job. But I can tell you we've transformed a lot of businesses using Excel as a backbone of decision making.
Yeah, and that does make sense. I think overall, like you said earlier, all of this sounds great, but how do we get started? So it's hard to wrap your brain around this whole like incremental approach where we're just focused on, again, that 30-day time period. What can we do in 30 days and what is the value that we can extract from that project? And then as you said, okay, once we test and trial, good. Okay, we've actually saved X percentage time or X percentage dollars. Let's sustain it and move on from there. and see if it can impact the rest of the plant. So very cool. So overall, again, visibility seems to be just all over this whole concept, and
Mhm.
really understanding what's happening at every single point within the manufacturing process. And without, again, all of that, the connected devices and all of the business intelligence tools and things like that, would it be safe to say that the place to start is to really just get intimate with all of those different, and I know there's like Gemba walks and other lean types of approaches
Mhm.
towards this,
Mhm.
but again, just helping folks who are maybe struggling to get to that next level of digitization, but they're
Yeah.
still really around, that a lot of manual process is still happening. What would
Yeah.
you recommend?
Yeah. Let's talk specifically about the safety chain implementation journey, because I think it's such a great example of, look, we've got paper everywhere, and we're doing a lot of good things, but it's too cumbersome, it's too complex. So I'm gonna take my first step. I'm gonna make a good decision. And I'm gonna buy a safety chain. I'm gonna implement it, uh, which I did as a former customer, and so I understand that journey intimately. Now you might say, okay, so now I've got all this, but I'm manually entering all the data. I've got all this equipment and it's doing all this data, but I'm manually entering things because they don't talk together, they don't work together. Okay, that might be the first step. Is let's get that X-ray data or whatever that equipment is. Checkwares, we see lots of integration, and let's start getting some of that information into my OE system. But also let's start getting that information, sent to the operations management reporting as well. Let's turn on part of our manufacturing process that we think or we've identified as part of our bottleneck. Let's do that. And then we'll take another step. Let's automate the next data collection point. And in one of my previous talks, we highlighted importantly that hidden value in terms of especially quality data. Quality data around what we do is one of the most significant ROI opportunities that don't get treated with the same, I would say, rigor as something like throughput and downtime do. And
Right.
so it's an example in terms of your safety chain journey is I went from paper, I took a first step to go digital, but now what do I do next? Now we want to start getting the right information, the right time, the right place. And the right time component to that is getting it right from my shop floor, getting it to where I need it, helping me make that decision faster or identifying the problem faster so I can start making a solution implemented. So that would be one example I think that comes to mind.
Yeah, that helps provide more context. And going back to a previous conversation where ultimately, the business itself wants to digitize, and again, everybody has great intentions, and you wholeheartedly dive into certain approaches like Kaizen or something like that, and you're trying your hardest to make it work. Um, what is typically the reason why pilots just
Hmm.
don't go beyond that stage? It's just, something might fail and everybody just gets frustrated, and the budget stops and
Yeah,
forget about it. We can't do this.
yeah, yeah. It's a great question. So two common things we see repeatedly with failed pilots or failed projects, failed tries. Two things we commonly see. So first and foremost is did we put value first? Did we define quantitatively what we expected to change from the business? That's the first thing we do. We don't pick the solution, we don't pick the approach, we don't pick the technology, we don't pick anything. You first answer that question. Then we have to see if what you want to pick fits that narrative. We often see people making decisions to purchase or implement or try something because it's a great thing to do, but we haven't actually built it back up from what we want to change in the business first. So that's the first thing. The second thing we commonly see around pilots is they're typically done in a way that is not engaged with the people on the floor who will be responsible on a day-to-day basis to enact the change after it's happened. And so by not including the front line, if you will, you commonly miss important things to that you took maybe for granted because it was done on a offsite somewhere, it was done in a vacuum somewhere. And so the engagement, the plan for what you need to change And then with that as well is also at the end of the pilot, you need to measure against what you assumed was going to happen. And while that seems very simple in nature, we commonly find that the driver is my boss told me so, or I need to do this. I
Right.
don't have time to figure it out. I don't know. I'm getting a lot of pressure to get this done quickly. And these are at all levels of the organization. My shareholders are pressuring me to make change quickly. Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. But without taking that first step and then validating what the change happened, we see a lot of people are trying to make change quickly, and you can do it quickly. That's not a problem, but you don't do it out of order.
So it really comes down to getting everybody who needs to be part of this whole digital transformation project involved, right? And it seems like maybe some folks have been overlooked. Like you were saying, really understand what's going on the floor level. You got to talk to the people on the floor, or you got to talk to other folks that are interacting with the whole, soup to nuts process of building the thing that you're doing. And then again, from a leadership perspective, right? Setting expectations, making sure again there's buy-in at the top, understanding those certain uh, different benchmarks that you're trying to achieve, instead of just saying, yeah, we're going to try this and we're going to save this amount of money, but the project's just too grand in scope. And again, just going back to setting expectations and making sure that everybody in the organization is kind of on board and understands what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Any advice though to helping ask helping folks who are trying to achieve digitization ask the right questions to make sure they're getting buy-in? Where do you see some roadblocks there when you're talking to folks?
Yeah, so we often see, I'd say when trying to prepare the business case, if you will, to why this is important, we often see a couple of common pitfalls when we're trying to create that consensus, whether it's with my manager or with his boss, with people on the floor. Uh, and what you want to do when you're considering that is essentially put yourself in their shoes. And so if the first few sentences don't highlight importantly what is important for that person, you probably lost them in the first 3 seconds. So what do I mean by that? This project will save $500,000 over the next 36 months. That's your opener. If I'm talking to someone on
Right.
the front line, this project will help reduce work strain for you. This project will help the company achieve its goal. These are the kind of things that we need to ensure that we are communicating. Usually they get buried at the back end, at the back page, the last thing. And by the time we're trying to identify and communicate what it is we're actually trying to do, we often don't put uh, we don't put the goal at the top. We don't put the goal at the leading part of our message.
Mm,
And the other thing is when we look at the value of something, always take the time to extract it over a 2 to 3 year period. Because it's the other comment we say, well,
that's it. Yeah.
this looks like $10,000 or $20,000. No, 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 no. This is 10,000 per month. Quote, maybe for eternity, right? Maybe not. Things always change, of course, but the point is you want to look, this change is not, I need to spend 10,000 and we're going to save 10,000. If I'm going to spend 10,000, we're going to save 100,000 because I get this value incrementally. So when we think about how you want to look at your process changes, you need to respect that they're going to continue to drive value for you over a period of time. There's another common miss we sort of see in terms of the way people evaluate their investments and say, well, I am spending 50,000, but I'm not really getting it back because the process is not going to change very much. Well, yeah, but over a 12 to 36 month period, you're probably getting back. You should be getting back at least somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000 for a $50,000 investment. It should be around 10x. So
Right. Right.
sometimes that value comes at incrementally, meaning you may not get it on the first month you've implemented because it might take 3 or 4 months for the full process improvement to be realized. And so, depending on what you're implementing, you may need to give yourself a respectful amount of time
Hmm.
to get to the goal. Once you get to the goal, then you can start to look at uh, what you do with that value that you save. So, a couple of common pitfalls in terms of how do I engage other people at different levels of my organization? Like it's quite simply just put yourself in their shoes and make sure you're communicating the message to what's important to them first, not what's important to you or why you want to do it.
Of course. Yeah. So the message of save for today to prepare for tomorrow, usually at, we'll just say like from the business perspective, I mean, it sounds good. But as you said earlier, everybody wants results now, right? You have daily KPIs you have to meet. You have shift KPIs you have to meet. Um, we don't want to wait. So again, to me, it's all about ensuring that everybody's on the same page. What is this project? What does this mean? How long is it going to take? How are we going to track the success of it? And again, focusing on that more incremental stage value. That's the approach that you're recommending. So I love it.
That's the approach is by taking that, you can ensure that you're not making major investments that will be part of that 70% failure. This approach will
Mhm.
put you in the 30% success category. And, and I think that's what we're all here to be part of.
100%. All right, good. I'm going to move to the next slide because I see that we're butting up against time here. So Cam, I do appreciate it. For all of you that joined us today, thank you so much. Clearly, there's so much more that we could talk about this. This, in fact, is part two of a series that we've started here with Mode 40. You can see their website down below there, mode40.com. Please do check them out. You can reach out to Cam, ask your questions. We have a bunch of resources also on safetychain.com that helps you kind of look a little bit deeper into some of your digital transformation projects and how we can help you optimize there. So again, we appreciate the time today, Cam. Hope you come back. Definitely love hearing those stories. Again, I'm going to go to the store and buy me some duct tape right after this call. But thank you so much. I learned a ton today.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Everybody have a good rest of your day. We'll see you next time on Beyond Compliance.